And it's an honor to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the components of a program that you can most certainly develop yourselves or with the local experts. So consider the next 20 minutes to be an idea case. Some of the things that you want to put in place if you want to change specifically that behavior that Maersk so brilliantly talked to just a couple of minutes ago. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll try to dive in on the details of some of the things that you saw in the 3-minute video. And yes, by the way, forgive us for the loud sound. One of the things that we really do try to stress in the simulated environment is how difficult it is to communicate. It makes no sense if I'm good at communicating if it's quiet, if there's such much noise that I'm not carrying myself. So thus, the noise that you saw in the video just a second ago. Now, what it is that we're trying to do is to ready the mind and the spine for a continuous development of leadership in a very, very robust manner. Now, slides are good, and they will talk to the mind, and they will be intuitively attractive. There's some good ideas there. But I need that knowledge to transfer down the spine to become reactions. So I don't waste the important milliseconds by making a wrong call. And that requires, again, exactly what Maersk was talking about. That requires simulations. It requires the opportunity to try and not just mentally understand. It needs to be part of me and part of my behavioral patterns in order to really have an effect once we're out there. So we're presenting to you now a program and some components that you can use in order for the knowledge that you want to share have the capability of having that moving down the spine to have a long-term effect. I'm happy to be here. I'm not usually part of the industry. I'm from a community called CFL. We're owned by the 1,000 largest companies in Denmark. We're about 100 people working out of the office that you see here behind me. One of the things that attracted us immensely when DONG was asking for some good ideas about this was that in their RFP, or the request for proposal, they referenced this little thing called ASM, which, by the way, is the book by Tim Marsh, which we have here today. And by referencing this book as something we should be considering when we design their program, they opened up a very important dialogue because it was not just the mind, but it was also the emotional reactions that people are receiving and they're projecting when they're out there making difficult decisions. The book is Effective Safety Management, strongly recommended. Another thing that attracted us was the fact that this was real time. We do a lot of leadership training where the executives have the benefit, the luxury, the opportunity of saying, yes, that's interesting. I'd like to get back to you on Thursday. Let me think about it. That's a luxury we don't have out in the real environment. And that means that the robustness, the core capability that you need to make a difference out there is entirely different. It's a big challenge, and it requires a different design, but it's certainly something that is doable. So with that, just a couple of principles in the design. First of all, it was very important to get commitment. And I'm also talking money here because this is not entirely inexpensive, but also in terms of making this relevant to the participants. The gentleman you see here behind me is Eichel Hennestad, and he's a high-level CEO within DONG, and he shows up for the opening of all the modules. He makes sure that he's there to explain why a recent event could have happened differently if this had been understood by the participants. He's also there at the end of the module when people are talking about their own commitments to the learning, and they have to report that really right back to him as if this had had an effect or not. We also wanted to do real exercises. We had to move away from the traditional classroom in order for the body to experience some of the things that goes on when people are confronted with difficult decisions in a very, very limited amount of time. That comes out of what we call the individual ILOs. Those are individual learning objectives, where I need to take responsibility of what do I need to learn, how have I changed at the end of this program. And that's an agreement that I make with my boss. So that requires a bit of preparation, but it makes sure that I'm focused all the way through the training. And then for this to work, you need small classes, because people will hide in numbers. So even though it's more expensive, we're having a cap on 12 people per class because we need to interact very heavily. We need it to be enough to do parallel group thinking, but we can't be too many because then we're not going to get the depth of the dialogues and the time, the scene time for the individual. And then finally, there's our mantra, because this is not a safety course. We expect the participants coming in there that they can identify if there's problems, if there's boxes in their exit routes. They should know that. What we're focusing on is the unsafe people. It's the people who do not react. They're walking by and say, you know what, I don't think they're going to drop it. I certainly hope they're not going to drop it, but I'll get back to it in a minute. That's where they have to, wear the coat of armor called leadership and engage. Maybe walk up and ask a couple of questions, find out what's going on. They could have a plan, so I don't want to jump in too early. But I want to be able to have that. So the mantra is the unsafe people, the unsafe behavior, not the bots themselves. In terms of architecture, a good program starts off with an awareness of where you are. We do that by 360 surveys where people will tell where do they feel they are themselves compared to where their peer thinks. We also handle in there the design of the individual learning objects. Then we move into the classroom where we have 3 modules. This takes quite a bit of time, 11 days total. The first 2 modules are in traditional conference facilities. It can be at your office, it can be almost anywhere as long as they're not being disturbed. But there are a module first related to me and DONG E&P as to what is required from me from a corporate level. Second one is me and myself as to how is my leadership. Do I use humor? Am I the serious type? Do I like planning, or am I more spontaneous? I need to find out my style in order to be convincing once I'm out there exercising my leadership. So I have to know what works for me and what doesn't. I also need a couple of very practical tools in terms of planning and preparations, etc., but we have to work on that on the second module. Third module, we put these things together. That's the one called Me and the Team. That's where we also handle conflict management, we talk situational leadership, etc. And we move the class out into a real-life environment as much as we can. Now, I certainly want to visit Maersk and see what they're doing there, but we chose a different route. We chose to use the Norway's Oil Institute's university facility in Stavanger, which is the Iris drilling rig up there called ullriggen. So we actually use that rig in particular for doing the last module. Now, after that, we move into applied learning. It was important to us that it couldn't stop with class. You had to take what was learned and what was promised to yourself through the ILOs and then take it out into the real world. So we have a team of professional psychologists and a single therapist as well that are ready to move with these persons and these participants out onto the drilling rig or out into the environment. It can be boats as well, subsea vessels, etc. And there's a offsite readiness in terms of what have you learned, what are we specifically going to be looking at, what kind of meetings have you planned, what can we expect, how much do you want me to get involved, are we debriefing right after, or am I allowed to, and they'll make the rules for that particular engagement depending on space and availability. And then they move on site and do the coaching out there. Yes, that is a logistical issue, and it will require quite a bit of planning, but the value is tremendous because that's where you get the feedback by a professional observer to see where things are really working or where there are still things that could be picked up. The learning doesn't stop here because DONG has also invested in a program with a long-term alumni network. And that's not just a network for company representatives. It does say alumni, which means that it is participants from the program that are then participating in the network. It's not that I wouldn't welcome all of you there in the program, but we need, in order to justify the time they invest in the network, we need to have the speed that we had when we left the training. In other words, we have to refer to the models, the techniques, the systems that we had handled through training that has to be shared on the network in order for it to be efficient. So that's what goes on in the alumni network. There's additional workshops and feedback loops. I won't bother with you with those right now. But importantly, people are never signing up as individuals. They're always signing up as buddies. And we do that to facilitate some group exercise. We also do that to hold each other accountable for the learning once we're out there. So typically a day and a night shift will team up, go there as buddies, because then they can hold each other accountable once they're out there in the real environment. Also, when it comes back into the way that the exercises are handled, then some will be at the buddy level and some will be in larger audiences. But it's an important component that you have someone where you have to share your objectives, but you're also taking responsibility for them and holding them accountable to what they promised to themselves to get out of the training. Okay, what do we bring? Now you know about the architecture, the program, then a couple of other things that's important. The most important things in the room are the colleagues, the people who have the experience from being out there. We need to facilitate the dialogue where they start sharing. The relation just shared by Maersk was 1 to 2. I mean, there may be 1 hour of learning and then 2 hours of reflection. That's key and important because that's where we get the real-life stories that will make this knowledge settle in. We also work a lot with different kinds of cases. There's a huge library available right now that are good to train specific things, because this case may be really good for coaching, and this case over here may be really good for intervention, but you mix the two, you don't get the training you want. So there's an extensive case library that goes in there as well. And then there's this thing called cards, and they actually look like this. And in reality, I can have the whole 11 days of training I have right here as a deck of cards. And I have that not because it covers everything, but this is what I need to remember. And I can bring it out into environments. There's no sparks or anything associated with this. I can really carry them around. And it's designed in a way where numbers 1 through 9 are a brief implementation of the DONG E&P ground rules that Magnus mentioned before. The booklet that did not live in the crew or in the environment has been turned into playing cards, which, by the way, are really good for poker as well, okay? So there's a multiple of uses of these. But 1 through 9 are the ground rules, and then all the face cards, queen, diamond, queen, diamond, kings, etc. Those face cards are then the leadership models that we want people to remember. Now that means that throughout the entire 11 days of training, we're not covering much more than 20 specific tools, but we're covering some very important ones. And I'll just give you a sampler as to how these look specifically. These are the ground rules, and you've already seen 2 ways of communicating this thing about the big stop button, or the Q stop, as it was mentioned by a previous presenter. We have now, on the Joker card here, is the essential short version description of the role of the company representative. There's always the C2 duty, and there is the big stop button that they have the liberty to press at any time. And after that, there's a rule of engagement. We have to define what, not how, because within DONG E&P, we have already asked the experts to know how. I just need to be very, very clear on what's challenging by the open questions to find out, do they really know? Are they also communicating between the different expertises in order to make this a safe operation? And then confirm the deliverables and provide feedback. Feedback then becomes one of the tools that we look into. And here's again a couple of cards. Feedback over there by the Queen of Diamonds. It's not just giving feedback, but it's very importantly to be able to receive feedback. Accepting that I might not like the format by which I am receiving this information, but there's something in there of value to me. I need to stay with it until I have the information that I need to handle my decisions. Coaching, that was mentioned as a specific way to handle knowledge sharing in the environment. That's a hugely important list of techniques. Doesn't mean we become coaches or therapists, but we grab coaching techniques because they're very valuable in changing the dialogue. Instead of me telling what you have to do, then I need to understand what you know prior in order to get to where we need to go. And then this thing about decisions. It's a little overcrowded card right now, and I don't expect you to remember it. But within the program, we have adopted a certain number of internationally validated models. One of them is called decision styles, and it takes into account how people react differently when they have a good time and when they're under pressure. How quickly will they focus in on the solution, and how much information can they handle on the way to that specific solution? And that becomes important to me if I have to solve a situation where some experts are saying this and these guys are still discussing, and over here they're really burning for me to say what they need to do right now. I need to handle their different decision styles in order for me to facilitate the choice that will lead us in the right direction. So these are in the cards. There are also other places, and I'll come up with a couple of hows just to wrap it up. Now, very importantly, these cards, they have to move from, again, things that are nicely printed in a deck of cards and move into something that matters to me. So everybody gets to sort through the cards according to these axes as to, is it easy? Is it difficult? Do I need to do more, or am I doing enough? In other words, down here I have the stuff that I find difficult that I realize I need to do more of. That is where I need to concentrate my effort. We help those, again, through the buddy teams to become part of the course. We also use iPads, and we use them not as something you get for participating in the course, but because the iPad provides us with a portfolio of standard applications that gives the training some capability that otherwise would not be possible. There's reference material, sort of background information on the cards. These things can be annotated, you can write on, you can print them. We can actually look across each other's notebooks to find out what the group is thinking about this. We have the capability to use the iPad as an annotation tool, which actually turned out to work really well with Town, as in shipping more than numbers, but a nice infrastructure for also providing annotated information. There's additional information that's always needed for the guys that suddenly realize that this is what I have been looking for. I need more. Then the iPad is the place to go, even without carrying around big binders. And finally, it's also a place where we share best practices coming out of the cases and some of the role plays that you already saw a little bit of out in the simulated environment on ullriggen. And finally, much to our surprise, we actually have bandwidth available to use the very simple front-facing camera that's on the iPads as well. When we talk about communication, we realize there's a difference between distance communication and present communication. When do I handle emotion? When do I handle fact? And the fact that you get about 70%, or somewhere between 60 and 70% from your visual input, makes it a really lousy choice to pick up your phone if I have the capability of getting video as well. And the iPad actually turns out to be a good platform for that, even in low bandwidth environment, because there's a camera facing you, and there's camera facing the world, which means I can let Town know what I'm seeing. They've used that more than we anticipated. Okay. Another component is a live simulation. This is a company representative who is trying to get these two drillers to actually give him or her the information that she needs. Now, we chose a simulation by hiring professional business actors. So these are actors that you may recognize from Danish films, and they have been carefully selected for their ability to handle situations in a complicated manner, because we need sometimes to stop, rewind 5 seconds, and can you do that a little more aggressive? Or, by the way, don't shout, but try to be quiet instead. See how that changes the room. What will happen if you lower your voice instead of raising it? Those things we can actually try out with the business actors. So they're an essential component in getting people confronted with, I was about to say their worst fears, I don't mean that, but the things that they're struggling most with, we can mold the actors on the fly to create that role in the environment that will give people not just something for their brains, but something that will move down their spine and stay with them for quite a lot longer. And as you can see, when we're out there, we are literally preparing for going offshore. So the translation from this simulation and out into the real environment here on Maersk Giant is actually very, very easy. So when I mentioned this group of psychologists that works with the program, they are the same people who are part of the facilitation on the simulated rig that also work with them out in the real environment. And that relation has proven to be very effective, because there has been other coaches out there, but they do not have long enough time together prior to have the trust that is needed in order to exchange some pretty brute information about what works or what doesn't work. So the fact that it's the same people that carries through all these exercises actually proven to be very important. Next picture is the networking portion. There are a network effort. We use that to build relations, and we use that in very different settings to continue the leadership dialogue. This is not a network where we discuss expert issues and technical stuff. We only talk about the leadership. How was I challenged? How could I have done it differently? So that's a continuing effort. And I won't play all these wonderful statements, but I'll give you a couple of flavors for what people have gotten out of it. Very importantly is they know themselves, and they know their reactions. They understand how decisions are made and how they can facilitate decisions. They have a more engaging dialogue, so they get more feedback and thus a better foundation for making the decisions. And then, very importantly, by doing the exercises, they feel that they can step into the leadership sooner than they would otherwise have gone, because they tried it, and they have been in front of a very big guy with a very loud voice, and it's just readier for them to engage the next time around. The thing we know from the exercises is also that we are actually capturing a lot of the information that goes on in the classroom also via this use of iPads. So we have a capability now of pinpointing pains, and these numbers down here relates to the spades, the hearts, and the clubs, 1 through 9. In other words, we know which ones are the most important pains, the hearts of 9 and the clubs of 4. Those are the cards, those are the specific ground rules that the company reps are most frequently being challenged by. And we also see a very important trend line going across, that the things that DONG requires of me, that I know pretty well and I can handle it. But going from the DONG objectives to the team objectives, we're getting about double amount of difficulties. In other words, that's where we need to do the training, because that's where people are having it the hardest. So with that, my time is about to run out, so I'll just give you a few ideas about what happens next. You've seen the why, the what, and a little bit about the how. Heading away, DONG is approaching this as very much a quid pro quo, or a tat for tat, or a something for something. And there's actually, if seats are available, should you like to try the experience, or do you have somebody who wants to participate, then they're opening up for other in similar roles to participate in the program. And we think we can handle it because it's going to be new inspiration, and it would be a very welcome thing. So dates are set should you like to see how this thing actually works in real time. There's also more information in the conference newspapers, and by the way, at the DONG booth, there's a little collection of articles that I encourage you to go pick up. There's a statement on the design. There's a little bit of a testimonial from some of the co-reps who participate in the program, and a little few extra information. So grab that in the DONG booth if you're so inclined. Now, in summary, we're doing this because we need stronger interpersonal leadership, and we need to handle those decisions in real time. The what is addressing both the mind and the spine. That's what we get out of the simulations. We need a long-term architecture, going out there as coaches, being present ever after in the network. And we have these cards of ground rules and tools that we see end up in toolbox talks that the co-rep will actually, well, guys, I just need you to consider Club of 9. What does that mean? Well, they use it as a catalyst for discussions that brings about very important points out there. How? Individual learning objectives. I need to know why I'm there. I need to use a simulation. I think I'm repeating myself here. Simulation, simulation, simulation. It's an important part. But we do that with the real actors in order to change the pressure. And then we have the on-site coaching and the alumni network. So going next, you are very much welcome to look more into the next flow. And at any time, we'd like to share experiences, like what worked for us and what could possibly be done differently. So at your discretion, we'd like to continue the discussion. That's the conclusion.